She walked into court in her SEAL uniform. Her father chuckled, her mother shook her head, and every head in the room turned toward her. The sound of her boots striking the polished floor echoed through the hall like distant gunfire, steady, sharp, and unapologetic. Lieutenant Commander Elise Hartley had spent the past 8 years serving her country as a Navy SEAL. The courtroom, however, was a different kind of battlefield, one where truth and pride clashed instead of bullets. She wasn't there to defend herself, but someone who meant more to her than anything else, her younger brother, Jake. Jake had always been the opposite of Elise, reckless, loud, and charming in all the wrong ways. Where Elise had discipline, he had chaos. And now, his chaos had landed him in court. The charge, assault and destruction of property. The alleged victim, the son of a wealthy local politician. Elise adjusted the medals on her chest and walked to the defense table. Jake sat there, bruised and frustrated, his suit wrinkled as if he had slept in it. He looked up when she approached, surprise flickering across his face. "You came?" "I don't leave my team behind," she said quietly. "Even if my team is a stubborn fool who doesn't know when to keep his fists down." He managed a weak smile. "Guess that makes me your toughest mission yet." Their father, a retired Marine, sat in the front row, watching with arms folded, a ghost of a grin under his mustache. Their mother, ever the voice of reason, shook her head as if she couldn't believe her daughter had shown up in uniform for a court hearing. But Elise knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted the judge, and everyone else in that room, to understand who she was and what kind of truth she stood for. When the judge entered, the courtroom fell silent. Judge Barrett was an older man with deep lines etched into his face. He glanced at Elise, his eyebrows lifting slightly. "Lieutenant Commander Hartley," he said, "I wasn't aware the U.S. Navy sent its SEALs into civilian courtrooms." "With respect, Your Honor," Elise replied, standing tall, "I'm not here representing the Navy. I'm here representing my brother, and the truth." A murmur ran through the audience. The prosecutor, a slick man with too much confidence and not enough integrity, smirked. "Your Honor, while the Lieutenant Commander's service is admirable, I'd like to remind the court that military heroics have no bearing on the facts of this case." Elise's eyes flashed, but she remained composed. "Facts are exactly why I'm here." The prosecutor began painting a picture of Jake as a violent troublemaker, claiming he attacked the politician's son, Ryan Alden, after a bar argument. Elise listened, silent but calculating. She had learned to read a man's face before he pulled the trigger. Reading lies in a courtroom was child's play. When the judge called her to the stand as a character witness, she stood with precision. "I've served in the world's harshest environments," she began. "I've seen fear, anger, and honor, real honor. My brother may be impulsive, but he is not violent without cause." The prosecutor smirked again. "Then perhaps you can explain why Mr. Alden was found unconscious, and your brother's fingerprints were on the weapon?" Elise turned her gaze toward him. "Because the weapon wasn't his, and because Mr. Alden wasn't as unconscious as he pretended to be." The courtroom rustled. Judge Barrett leaned forward. "Explain." Elise reached into a folder she'd brought and produced several photographs. "I requested access to the police body cam footage and local CCTV. The report says my brother threw the first punch, but the footage shows Mr. Alden shoving a woman first, the bartender, who tried to break up the fight. Jake stepped in to protect her." She clicked a small remote. A screen in the courtroom flickered to life, showing the scene. The grainy footage revealed the truth. Ryan Alden pushing the woman, Jake pulling him back, then Alden swinging first. The crowd gasped. The prosecutor stammered. "That footage, how did you—" "I asked for it," Elise interrupted coolly. "I know how to gather intel. It's my job." Judge Barrett studied her, then turned to the prosecutor. "Counselor, were you aware of this footage?" The man hesitated. "Your Honor, it was deemed irrelevant." "Deemed irrelevant?" the judge barked. "You withheld exculpatory evidence." The color drained from the prosecutor's face. Elise stood quietly, her expression unreadable. Her father's faint chuckle echoed from the gallery. Her mother, though still shaking her head, had tears in her eyes. After a long silence, the judge spoke. The court finds sufficient reason to dismiss all charges against Jake Hartley. Case dismissed. A heavy breath escaped Elise's chest as if she'd just come back from a mission. Jake turned to her, speechless. You saved me." She gave him a small, rare smile. "No, Jake. You saved that bartender. I just made sure the world knew it." The family stepped outside into the crisp air. Reporters were already gathering, cameras flashing. Someone shouted, "Lieutenant Commander, were you trying to make a statement by wearing your uniform today?" Elise stopped. "Yes," she said simply. "That truth, discipline, and courage don't just belong on the battlefield. They belong everywhere." As they walked toward the parking lot, her father put a hand on her shoulder. "You handled that like a real soldier," he said, "but also like a sister." Elise smiled faintly. Sometimes those roles aren't so different. Later, that evening, she sat on the porch alone, watching the sunset bleed across the horizon. Her mother came out quietly and sat beside her. For a while, neither spoke. Then her mother said softly, "You know, when I saw you walk into that courtroom in your uniform, I thought it was arrogance." Elise looked down, turning her cap in her hands. "And now?" Her mother smiled. "Now I see it was strength." Elise didn't respond, but inside, she felt a warmth she hadn't felt in years, a mix of peace, pride, and belonging. Jake joined them, leaning on the porch railing. "No," he said with a grin. "I was kinda hoping you'd storm the courtroom with smoke grenades or something." Elise rolled her eyes. "Don't tempt me." He laughed, but his tone grew more serious. "I'm sorry, Elise, for always being the screw-up. You've been out there fighting real battles while I've been fighting my own stupidity." She looked at him, her voice steady. "Everyone fights their own war, Jake. What matters is that you don't give up the fight." The night settled in. Crickets sang in the background, and for the first time in years, the Hartley family sat together without argument or distance. A week later, a small article appeared in the local newspaper. Navy SEAL exposes corruption in assault case. It mentioned how her calm determination brought justice, not just for her brother, but for truth itself. Elise didn't care much for the attention. She wasn't seeking headlines. She had simply done what she was trained to do: protect, defend, and uncover the truth. But somewhere deep down, she knew something had changed. Her father's quiet pride, her mother's softened eyes, her brother's newfound resolve. It all reminded her that sometimes the hardest battles are not fought overseas, but right here at home. That night, as she polished her uniform and prepared to return to duty, Elise glanced at her reflection. The metals shimmered faintly under the light, but her eyes were steady, calm, and certain. She had fought wars in deserts and oceans, but today she fought one in a courtroom, and won. And in that silent reflection, she realized something profound. Strength isn't measured by the battlefield you choose, but by the truth you stand for when the world turns against you. Her phone buzzed, a message from her commanding officer. "Report back to base in 48 hours. New assignment." Elise smiled faintly, straightened her collar, and whispered to herself, "Mission never ends." Outside, the wind carried the sound of freedom, faint but steady, like the echo of her boots in that courtroom, reminding everyone that justice, like courage, always walks in uniform. She walked into court in her SEAL uniform. Her father chuckled, her mother shook her head, and for a long moment, no one dared breathe. The courtroom went silent, every pair of eyes turning toward her as if she had brought a piece of the battlefield. The rhythmic sound of her boots echoed down the narrow aisle, measured, deliberate, commanding. The insignia on her chest gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. She wasn't there to show off her rank. She was there to send a message. Lieutenant Commander Elise Hartley had worn that uniform through deserts, jungles, and black ops missions that no one would ever hear about. But this was different. This wasn't an enemy stronghold or a classified extraction. This was a courtroom in her hometown, a place that felt more hostile now than any battlefield. At the defense table sat her younger brother, Jake. His face carried a bruise under one eye, his posture slouched in defeat. Elise could tell from the way his hands clenched together that he was trying hard not to break. He had always been her opposite, reckless where she was cautious, wild where she was disciplined. And now, that recklessness had landed him here. She took her seat beside him without a word. He looked up, startled. "You actually came?" he whispered, his voice trembling with guilt. "I don't leave people behind," she said quietly, her tone clipped and firm. "You're still my brother." Behind them sat their parents. Their father, once a Marine, gave a low chuckle that was half pride, half disbelief. "That's my girl," he muttered. Their mother, ever the cautious one, only sighed and shook her head, as if silently saying, "Why must you always make everything a spectacle?" But Elise didn't care about appearances. She cared about truth. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Barrett entered, a stern man with sharp eyes that missed nothing. When his gaze landed on Elise, there was a flicker of recognition. "Lieutenant Commander Hartley," he said slowly. "It's been some time since this court has seen a uniform of that caliber. What brings you here today?" Elise stood. "Your Honor, I'm here to ensure that my brother gets a fair hearing. I'm not representing the Navy, I'm representing the truth." A ripple of whispers went through the audience. The prosecutor, a smooth-talking man in an expensive suit, smirked. "Your Honor, while I respect the Lieutenant Commander's service, I trust we can all agree that military prestige does not grant one immunity from the law." Elise didn't blink. "Nor does wealth," she said evenly. The comment landed like a stone in still water. Jake was accused of assaulting Ryan Alden, the son of a powerful local senator. The fight had started in a bar, and by the time the police arrived, Ryan was unconscious, and Jake was the only one standing. The media had eaten it up, a veteran's brother attacking the son of a politician. A perfect scandal. The prosecutor began with his version of the story, painting Jake as a violent drifter who lashed out without reason. Elise listened, her jaw tightening with each word. When he described Jake as a threat to society, she almost laughed out loud. When it was her turn to speak, she stood and approached the stand like a soldier walking into enemy territory. Her voice was calm, clear, and deliberate. "My brother is not perfect," she began, "but he's not violent without reason. I know what violence looks like. I've lived it. I've led men into battle and seen what true aggression is. This was defense." The prosecutor leaned forward. "Defense? Against what, Lieutenant Commander?" "Mr. Alden was unarmed." Elise raised an eyebrow. "Unarmed men don't usually throw the first punch at women." A wave of murmurs broke through the courtroom. The judge frowned. "Explain that statement." Elise reached into the folder she'd brought and pulled out printed stills from security footage. "The police report was incomplete," she said. "I obtained copies of CCTV footage from the bar. It clearly shows Mr. Alden pushing a female bartender who tried to stop their argument. My brother stepped in. Mr. Alden hit first. Jake hit back." The prosecutor's smirk faltered. "That footage wasn't submitted as evidence." "No," Elise replied coolly, "because someone chose not to submit it." She placed the photos on the evidence table. The judge studied them, his expression darkening. "Counselor," he said to the prosecutor, "were you aware of this material?" The man stuttered, his earlier confidence cracking. It wasn't relevant to the charge." "Not relevant," the judge snapped. "A video showing the alleged victim as the aggressor is very relevant." Elise remained silent, her composure perfect. The courtroom had turned into a live minefield, and she was walking through it without flinching. Her father leaned back with a proud grin, whispering to her mother, "That's our girl." Her mother still shook her head, but this time she was fighting a smile. Elise continued, her voice steady. "Jake didn't pick that fight. He ended it. And then, when the police arrived, the witnesses who could have told the truth were silenced, bar staff who were threatened with losing their jobs if they spoke out." "How do you know that?" the judge asked. Elise hesitated for only a second. "Because one of them contacted me privately. I can't reveal her name here for her safety, but I have a recorded statement verifying that she was told to keep quiet by a member of Mr. Alden's father's security detail." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled notes furiously. The prosecutor was pale now, flipping through his files in panic. Judge Barrett raised a hand for silence. "Enough," he said, then turned to Elise. "Lieutenant Commander, do you understand the gravity of what you're alleging?" "Yes, Your Honor," she said. And I also understand the gravity of letting an innocent man take the fall because someone has political influence. The judge leaned back, silent for several long seconds. Finally, he sighed. "Case dismissed," he said firmly. All charges dropped. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Jake exhaled shakily and slumped in relief. Elise placed a steady hand on his shoulder. Outside, the bright flash of cameras greeted them. Reporters swarmed forward. "Lieutenant Commander Hartley, did you plan this as a statement?" one shouted. Elise met the chaos with calm authority. "Yes," she said. "The statement is simple. Justice isn't a privilege, it's a right." She walked past them with Jake and her parents, ignoring the flashing lights. Once they reached the parking lot, her father broke into laughter. "You walked into that courtroom like you owned it." Elise smirked. "I don't own it, Dad. I just refuse to be afraid of it." Her mother touched her arm. "When you walked in wearing that uniform, I thought it was too much," she said softly. "But when I saw how you stood your ground, I realized it wasn't pride. It was purpose." Elise smiled faintly. "Sometimes the only way to make people listen is to remind them who you are." Jake leaned against the car, still processing everything. "You know," he said, "you didn't have to do all that. You could have just let me learn my lesson the hard way." She turned to him. "Jake, I've seen what happens when people stop fighting for what's right. I won't let that happen to my family." He looked down, guilt flickering across his face. "I don't deserve you." "Maybe not," she said, half smiling. "But you're still my brother. That's permanent." That night back home, Elise sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. The quiet felt strange after the tension of the day. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't on a mission or under orders. She was just a sister. Her father joined her, settling into the chair beside her. "You know," he said, "I used to think you'd end up like me, too stubborn, too hard to love. But watching you today, I realized you're something more. You've got my grit and your mother's heart." She looked out at the stars. "I just did what I had to." He chuckled. "That's what all heroes say." Inside, Jake was laughing with their mother in the kitchen, something Elise hadn't heard in years. Maybe the family was finally starting to heal. The next morning, Elise packed her duffel bag. Her phone buzzed with a message from her commanding officer. "Report to base. New deployment in 48 hours. She zipped the bag shut, took one last look around her room, and slipped on her cap. Jake appeared in the doorway, still groggy. "You're leaving again?" "Duty calls," she said. He hesitated, then hugged her tight. "Come back safe," she smiled. "I always do." As she walked out the door, her mother called after her, "Be careful." Her father added, "Give 'em hell." And Elise, standing in the sunlight with her uniform crisp and her eyes steady, turned back and said softly, "Always." When she drove away, the radio played softly, some old country song about courage and home. She looked in the rearview mirror at the small town growing smaller behind her. She knew the world wouldn't remember the courtroom that day, or the truth she fought for. But she didn't need them to. She hadn't worn her uniform for attention. She'd worn it because sometimes justice needs to see what courage looks like up close. And as the miles stretched before her, Elise smiled faintly, whispering to herself, "Mission never ends," because for her it never did.